Tonight we're going to do this topic on Tara, green Tara, and how we activate what we're calling here feminine energy in spiritual practice. So we're going to look at this idea as kind of the starting point for tonight's talk, and then go into a little bit more about green Tara and what she's all about, what she symbolizes, how to work with that. So I actually have the wrong date on here. September 18th. Should be the 19th. Sorry about that. Maybe it's because I did it yesterday or something and was using yesterday's date. So let's do a short meditation before we begin. I like to start with a short meditation just so that we have a chance. Most of us have had busy days, things that we've been doing during the day. So it's nice to be able to let some of that go by focusing the mind a little bit. And then once we've settled the mind some, then I'd like to lead you in a short meditation to set your motivation for being here, to make sure that we have the best results from our time together. So most of you have some familiarity with meditation, but just find a comfortable position. It's good if the back can be somewhat straight, kind of upright, and then relaxing into this posture, trying to let go of any tension that might become an obstacle to your meditation. And there are many techniques to use with the breath, and if you have one that you already use to settle the mind, to focus the mind, then you can do that. And if you need a suggestion, then I'll suggest working with this point towards the tip of the nose. When we breathe in and out through the nostrils, there's a very subtle sensation that occurs in the area of the nostrils and just inside the nose. And just make that your meditation object. Just try to stay present with that as best as you can through the inhalation, through the exhalation. But no doubt the mind will wander. And when we find that suddenly we're thinking about something that happened today or something that's preoccupying our minds. We might even get distracted by sounds or other sensations in the body. When that happens, just simply let go of those. Try not to continue to follow them. They're like clouds in the sky that we can just choose to pull back into the vastness of the sky, and rather than being focused on that cloud, just let it simply pass by. And then return to the breath. Bring your awareness once more to the breath. So we'll just do this in silence. I'll ring the little bowl here and begin the meditation. And then after a few minutes in silence, I'll lead you in setting motivation. So now let's take a moment to adjust our motivation. And any time that we come together to work with the Buddha's teachings, we always want to make sure that we have the best use of this time. In the traditional teachings, they speak to 3 levels of motivation. The first one, where we recognize that the Buddha's teachings can actually help us in terms of what comes after this life, our next rebirth, another opportunity that we want to have ideally to continue our study, our practice of the Dharma. And that's a perfectly fine motivation to make it Dharma, but nonetheless, it's not a final result that we can rely upon, that we can count upon. So the next level of motivation is to seek liberation, to seek freedom from all the patterns that have led us to have difficulty, suffering, dissatisfaction, pain, discontentment, all these various things that are unsatisfactory. And then to strive for the state of liberation, nirvana, peace, where we can be free of all of that. And the Buddha's teachings also help us to accomplish that goal. Tonight we'll be looking at Tara, who's often called the liberator, helping us to be liberated from everything that plagues us, all our negative states of mind, all of the products of that. And really genuinely want that for yourself. Want tonight to become a cause to help you to be free from your own suffering. But then finally, the most far-reaching level of motivation that we can bring to these teachings is where we open our eyes and our hearts to the reality that all sentient beings are suffering just like us, are dealing with dissatisfaction and discontentment just like us, are caught up in this cycle of existence just like us. And when we see that every single being is also like us in wanting to be happy, wanting to be free from suffering, we're all really fundamentally the same. So it would be quite narrow-minded and selfish for us to simply be concerned about our own freedom from suffering when so many other beings continue to be plagued by these sufferings in this way. So the best possible motivation that we can bring, especially to this teaching on green Tara, this very powerful force that we can bring into our lives and help transform our own minds and our own hearts into the state of Buddhahood, is the mind of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta being that strong intention to fully awaken, to accomplish the greatest potential that you can for yourself, but do it in the name of other beings so that you can then benefit other beings. These are the 2 main aspirations that we want to ideally bring to this teaching. To want to bring all beings out of suffering, just as green Tara does, just as these forces in our world can help us to do. And we want to become a part of that force by becoming just like Buddha Tara, having the same completed qualities, the same complete purification, all the things that will make you the perfect guide for all sentient beings, to lead them out of their suffering and into enlightenment as well. So try to hold that very far-reaching motivation if you can, so that everything we do tonight becomes of great benefit, not just to ourselves, but to all beings. Okay, so tonight we're going to go into this idea of feminine energy. Obviously in our culture, when we identify a certain amount of gender fluidity, but nonetheless we can still speak of these sort of poles of masculine energy, feminine energy, and what they're about, because we don't want to make them into a complete duality, but nonetheless sort of recognize that they do play different roles. I went to, on the internet when I first did this talk, I think I first did this talk somewhere back in 2008 or something, I don't know when it was, at our center in Santa Fe. And I've kind of worked on the talk a bit more, maybe added a few little things here and there, but it's kind of a nice subject. But one of the things that I did in initially researching this was go online and found a little article that's not Buddhist in any way, but nonetheless speaks to a male, female, feminine, masculine kind of way of looking at energy. That's, again, a bit more secular perhaps. But I have a few things on the screen here that speak to how we might look at how male energy is manifesting in our world. It being more directed, focused, goal-oriented, productive, and outward thrusting. It corresponds with linear left brain thinking and also with doing. And again, this is just one way of looking at what male energy is. It's not to say that you don't see that type of energy in women or other people in terms of what they identify as their gender. But nonetheless, this is maybe one more traditional way that we see that kind of energy in our world. And of course, we live in a very patriarchal society. In general, that's been what has happened in the development of our world, is a lot of male energy kind of dictating what's gone on and how societies have been built and civilizations have been formed and so on. And so that kind of productive, active doing energy that is very, very much about building our world, we need that kind of offset to that to some degree that has been suppressed to a large extent in human history, but nonetheless has always been playing some role. The female energy is described by this man, Shepherd Hoodwin, as being creative, process-oriented, unstructured, inward drawing. It corresponds with circular, right brain thinking and with being. So left brain being much more precise, analytical, all that type of stuff, whereas right brain being very creative, very open, very spacious. And trying to allow us to get in touch with more intuitive things as opposed to empirical things on the male side. So you have these two kinds of forces that I think to some degree mirror what we mean in Buddhism by these two energies, not precisely. But nonetheless, we're going to look at this in terms of Buddhism and what would we call feminine energy in Buddhism? What would we call masculine energy in Buddhism? So this talk tonight, I essentially am dividing it into kind of two different parts. The first part won't be perhaps quite as long, but to look at the Sutra and Tantra presentations of male and female energy in Buddhism. It's been I've heard from Kim, there were some teachings from Rob Priest in terms of Tantra here recently. Sutra and Tantra are differentiated in Buddhist terms, especially within Tibetan Buddhism, as being the more kind of exoteric and common general teachings are what we call sutra, meaning that they were given to a much more general audience with the intention of just allowing people to have access to the teachings. But then those who had practiced those teachings very well, who had developed great ability within the sutra, could practice what's called Tantra. Tantra in Buddhism is not the same as the word that as it's used in a lot of different other contexts. It's referring to a set of teachings that the Buddha gave that can help one to tap into very deep energies within one's own body and use those energies as a means of transformation. Use them as a means to becoming a Buddha even more quickly than what the sutra path teaches. So we'll get into that a bit more as we go to this first presentation that kind of contrasts those two. Because we can look at Arya Tara, Green Tara, in terms of the sutra presentation and understand some facets, but we always want to also drive in that tantric presentation that shows the ability that she has to help us do these deeper transformation, this deeper process. Then I want to go into that exploration of the Buddha Tara as a means to activate feminine energy. Do you do Tara Puja here on a regular basis or have any Tara practices? Tara Puja is a little bit longer ceremony that FPMT does at many of their centers. Lama Zopa is very fond of this practice. But then there's also a shorter practice. It's really good if you can make some connection with this Buddha Tara. I have to tell one little story, because I've always had this as part of my daily practice since about 1997, something around Tara. And that's because when I went to study in Italy for 7 years, I got some advice from I think it was Geshe Lama Konchok over in Kopan. Venerable Rabina had asked me to write to him. She said, you need to write to him and find out exactly what advice you need to make sure you don't have any obstacles while you're studying for 7 years. And I said, okay, I'll write. And I basically got this little message back that says, all he said was, you have to recite the praises to the 21 Taras 3 times every day. And I was like, okay, thank you, very glad. And I continue to do it now, even though the master's program was many years ago. So I actually do it 4 because I like to make sure that I got it right somewhere along. I have a tendency to miss words or make mistakes. But anyway, it's a really powerful practice. And of course, I learned it in the Tibetan initially, but most of our centers tend to recite it in the English, which to me doesn't have quite the power of the Tibetan. But anyway, those are just some little footnotes on that practice. But we'll talk about Green Tara because she's really a very powerful being to invoke and to use for inspiration, to help us on our path. So in terms of the Sutra and Tantric presentations of male and female energy, the goal always is unification, is totality, is kind of getting where we no longer have a kind of duality within ourselves, but rather these factors kind of completely united. So this is, the whole vision that Tantra, of course, is a very powerful method for developing, but it's the same in the Sutra path. These are just kind of 2 pathways that lead you to Buddhahood. The Sutra path is said to be somewhat limited in terms of how far it can take you, though Tantra is said to be able to take you the full distance and, moreover, get you there much more quickly. But you don't get there quickly because you want to become a Buddha because you can't stand being an unenlightened being. It's more that you want to become a Buddha because you know that others need Buddhas in their lives, because they will continue to suffer as long as you aren't a Buddha. Because a Buddha, as we're going to talk about, is a particular state of mind that one can attain where one no longer has any work to do to get to any sort of goal. You're in the goal, and moreover, you're able to help others from that place of having achieved that for yourself. Tantra is simply a much quicker way to get to that unification, that totality of our being. And I'll share a few quotes in a little bit from Lama Yeshe, who has a wonderful book if you just want to get a taste for what Tantra is about. There's a book called Introduction to Tantra that he wrote that's really very easy for people to read and kind of work with. How many of you in the room have read that book? A few, yeah, good. I think it's really, really quite good. I'm going to get that up on my screen here so I don't have to find it again. I forgot to do that before coming in tonight. So feminine energy, as I said, does need some emphasis in our culture. We have dealt with mainly masculine energy, that type of building and destroying and all that kind of creative or energy stuff that's going out in that way that hasn't been doing it in perhaps the most creative and wholesome way. Rather, it's just been a force in our world that has been very active, but nonetheless not always wise in terms of how that action has played out. So in the sutra presentation, when we look at how that is traditionally set out, the presentation frequently, and Venerable Rabina always uses this as an example. It comes from one of the treatises. There's 2 elements of the path that are like 2 wings of a bird. For the bird to get to its destination, it needs both wings. If you imagine a 1-winged bird, it's never going to get very far, right? It won't even get up off the ground. It will have to walk where it wants to go. So we need these 2 wings. It's a wonderful analogy for kind of these 2 aspects that we can link up with female and male energy. One is the wing of wisdom. The wing of wisdom is the feminine side. It's interesting that wisdom is always identified with the feminine. Even when we talk about the perfection of wisdom, which is embodied in the Prajnaparamita, who is a female Buddha, she, represents that kind of wisdom fully manifest in female form. And Green Tara, to a large degree, has the same idea, but a much more active form of that wisdom. So we see that this is absolutely an essential part of our practice, and specifically, quite, at the deepest level, the transcendental wisdom that realizes emptiness, which I'll talk about a little bit later. This means the wisdom that is actually able to cut through, completely remove our deepest cause of our problems, what we call our ignorance, the fundamental ignorance that we've had since beginningless time. So this wisdom wing is a very powerful one. But it needs together with it the compassion, the method, the virtue, the practices, the more active form. It needs the sort of very static kind of wisdom within the dynamic movement out towards others. We have to be coming from a place of that deep wisdom and then acting in the world accordingly. So practices of generosity, of engaging in good morality, and so on, all these that are part of the Bodhisattva path are more like the method wing or compassion wing. These two factors being complementary and never trying to be practiced completely out of touch with each other, because then you've got kind of a, too heavy on one side, too light on the other. So we want to make sure that we balance these as much as possible. And of course, the sutra path is very much one where we go back and forth between these two. We spend time focusing on the wisdom because we need to cultivate that more deeply so we understand reality and make sure that we're in line with things. And then that takes us off our cushion so we can then be much more engaged in the world and practice these compassionate methods of connecting with others. And then we go back into the wisdom wing and back into the compassion wing, kind of like a back and forth. We'll see this contrasted with Tantra. Let's get into the rest of the sutra presentation first. As we talk about those two wings, we talk about the wing of wisdom and compassion. This is how Rinpoche refers to these now, is talk about the merit of wisdom and the merit of virtue. So as we're practicing this in terms of the result that we are aiming for, this is the path of wisdom. The path of wisdom will eventually result in the experience of what's called the Dharmakaya, the truth body of a Buddha. This is your own personal experience of having fully developed your mind having gone to the state of complete omniscience, complete awareness of everything that exists, which is like so far outside of our understanding, we can't even imagine what such a mind would be like. This wisdom wing develops all the way into that. I call this kind of the personal dimension of a Buddha's experience. And we all right now have a personal dimension to our being, which is kind of your own private world of your mind, the thoughts that you have, the things that you are, entertaining with your mind. No one else is privy to that, right? That's your own little personal world. When you become a Buddha, your personal world is this omniscient mind that is knowing everything that exists at the same time. Can't, again, really even imagine what that's like. But if you were just your personal world, like a Buddha was just that, and I would say even from your own point, if you were just in your own little personal world, there wouldn't be any way to help others, right? You need a social dimension. You need an ability to have some interpersonal relationships that will help you to actually accomplish the work, which is to help all beings to attain that same state. Therefore, the merit of virtue, or this kind of method side of it, this ripens into what are called the form bodies of a Buddha, the Rupakaya. And just as we are embodied and can then relate to others, like I'm relating to you by talking and my eye contact with you and so on, all of this is what Buddhas do to help us, is to manifest in forms to be able to reach sentient beings. Because from the vantage point of this omniscient mind, there's no way for sentient beings to reach that. It's beyond the ability of a sentient being to come into contact with that mind in its pure form. They need that pure form to take a physical form, to become material. So this is how Buddhas actually help sentient beings. They've achieved this full blossoming of their wisdom, and then through the force of their method of kind of having engaged in all these compassionate practices to connect with others, they are able to take form, that enlightened mind appearing in various ways to help others. This is where we'll get into green Tara being one of those ways that there is that manifestation. So this is the sutra path in terms of you have these two wings that you're accumulating and working with and trying to collect some energy behind them, some merit behind them, and they result in your truth body and your form bodies. Let's go to the other one. We'll see if we... Whoops, how did I get there? I hit end. I don't want to end quite yet. So let's go to the Tantra presentation. This is where, like I said, these two elements of the path are combined into one mind. And this is kind of, again, once more, a bit of the difficulty of practicing Tantra, because we are trying to practice this wisdom realizing emptiness, which is manifested in what we call the clear light mind, kind of getting into this very space of tapping into our subtlemost mental energy, our subtlemost wisdom energy. And at the same time, that wisdom energy manifesting in a form that is called the illusory body, which becomes eventually the body of a Buddha in a physical form. But nonetheless, these two in Tantra are very much about practicing them together. In Tantra, Rob Priest, I'm sure, spoke of this, there's the main practice you engage in is what's called deity yoga, or we could call it Buddha yoga. Deity simply means a particular Buddha figure. And when we talk about Green Tara, we'll talk about how she can be a template, in a sense, an archetype for working with developing your own Buddha nature, your Buddha potential, into that fully enlightened state. So in Tantra, what you're practicing in deity yoga is through having received empowerment, through having been with a very powerful being, a guru who can then implant the seeds of enlightenment within you, awaken the seeds you already have within you, then you can practice seeing yourself in that form. You can practice pretending that you're Green Tara so that eventually you create the energy for those two things to come together. The wisdom mind that supports that because it arises within that wisdom, and the illusory body that is the product of that will eventually become the fully enlightened state. So, the fully enlightened state in terms of this complete unification that is presented in Tantra is what we often call the unification of clear light and illusory body. This clear light mind that is manifesting in the Dharmakaya eventually, the personal dimension, and the illusory body that eventually becomes the form body, the Rupakaya, the interpersonal or social dimension. The result's the same. Tantra and Sutra don't teach different results. They just teach a different methodology about how to get there, because one is able, through using this very subtle practice of deity yoga, to bring those practices together, be able to practice them at the same time. So the clear light mind is this subtle, most blissful energy that we're trying to produce that is in touch with that wisdom, realizing how things all are. The illusory body is that subtle form by which we can eventually interact with others when it ripens into its full enlightened state. So again, these are just presentations of female and male energy. The wisdom energy of the female together with the male energy that ripens into a way of being in the world, a way of enacting all of that wisdom with others in a very profound way. So let me read these passages and then we'll open it up to see if there are any questions so far. Again, if you get this book, there's some wonderful stuff in it, but he is kind of intent upon getting across this idea that we have within us that totality already. Kind of a union of both of those energies, the female and the male, just with the idea that we want to be able to make that fully manifest through these practices. So, this is the section I want to read, I think. Make sure I'm at the right place. At present, our search for pleasure is habitually directed outward toward external objects of our desire. When we cannot find or hold on to these desired objects, we become frustrated and unhappy. For example, many of us are looking for the man or the woman of our dreams, someone who will be the source of limitless happiness for us, yet no matter how many boyfriends or girlfriends we might collect, these dreams remain unfulfilled. What we do not realize is that within each one of us is an unlimited source of both male and female energy. So many of our problems arise because we are either ignorant of or we suppress what we already have within us. Men try to hide their female side and women are afraid of expressing their male energy. As a result, we always feel cut off from something we need. We do not feel whole and therefore turn expectantly toward other people for the qualities missing in ourselves, in the hope of gaining some sense of completeness. As a result, much of our behavior becomes contaminated by insecurity, possessiveness. In fact, all the problems in the world, from one person's anxiety to warfare between nations, can be traced to this feeling of not being whole, not kind of having both of those energies completely in alignment. Tantra provides powerful methods for getting in touch with our essential wholeness. Tantric art is filled with potent symbols of the unity and completeness characteristic of our fully realized potential. The image of male and female deities in sexual embrace, taken by some early Western interpreters of Tibetan Buddhism as a sign of its degeneration, is actually a symbolic portrayal of the inner unification of our own male and female energies. On a deeper level, their embrace symbolizes the aim of the very highest tantric practices, the generation of a most subtle and blissful state of mind that by its very nature is supremely suited to penetrate ultimate reality and free us from all delusion and suffering. On this level, the male figure represents the experience of great bliss, while the female is the symbol of non-dual wisdom. Thus, their union has nothing whatsoever to do with the gratification of the senses, but rather indicates a totally integrated state of blissful wisdom that completely transcends ordinary sense desires. So this is the tantric path, is one of kind of recognizing we have these energies within us. We shouldn't be so caught up in the physical form that we're currently taking and think that an over-identification with that, because that becomes very dualistic then, right? It doesn't allow us to embrace our totality. Rather, we have to engage in these practices and use the inspiration of these beings to help us to make this much more integrated, and this totality that we can actually experience. So green Tara, as I said, we're going to use this as the exploration of the feminine energy simply because, once more, even if you consider yourself female in the room, there's probably still a part of the female energy that needs to be activated within you. But also to recognize that both of these are absolutely essential if we're ever going to gain that totality. So any comments on this before I kind of move on to the topic of green Tara and what she symbolizes in terms of this? Yes, Claudia.
So, like, if everyone has that type of energy, there's some beings that have more masculine energy.
Right. We can say that in general, though, again, it's not an absolute. Venerable Robina was quite funny one time when she came to Santa Fe, because if you've ever met her, she's got more male energy than female energy in my mind. I mean, but she's got that female force behind it of her amazing, sharp wisdom, but nonetheless. And she said that. She pointed to me and she says, look at Don over here, he's got much more feminine energy, and look at me, I've got much more masculine energy. So don't think that it has anything to do with your gender. It has to do with kind of, again, some predispositions that in a particular life that some people might feel that they're more in line with that masculine energy, some more with the feminine energy. But the goal, as Lama Yeshe was pointing out, isn't to overly identify with either one of those, but to recognize that we have to use both. We have to find a way to integrate that.
Kids now are more gender neutral.
Gender fluid, yeah.
And so that's kind of like just a thing that they're more in tuned, perhaps with how we're raising them.
Perhaps. I mean, it can be, because this duality of male-female in our culture is problematic to a large degree too. Not that we can't deny biology in terms of the roles that genders play in terms of reproduction and, the mother carrying the child and all of that. I mean, this is biology, so we can't deny that. But in terms of our psyches, in terms of our minds, we need to be more in balance. We need to be less kind of strong identify. And we see what happens in male culture. I saw it when I was young growing up, that male culture, when it gets in its own little bubble and reinforces it, it becomes a bit out of control. It gets very forceful and doesn't have the wisdom to know what it's doing. It has all that energy, but gets very misdirected. And then feminine energy, when it's not fully manifest, can become quite quiet and suppressed and not so active in the world. And so these two have to be kind of manifest together, So I think that there's something to be said for that. I don't know what the products will be years from now. Hopefully the planet will still be around and everybody's still living on it, but what will be the product of that kind of more gender fluidity in many parts of our world? There are certainly some cultures. I mean, someone told me that in some Native American cultures, they had 6 genders. They didn't identify as strictly male or female within what they would call male or female. There were variations on that, gradations and what have you. So I think what we're dealing with in most of our Western culture is a duality that needs to be somewhat overcome. But once more, it doesn't mean you deny necessarily biology, because we're going to see again that Tara, as what she embodies, is said to be kind of the mother of all the Buddhas, because there's a very powerful force in being that creator of life, but it can't happen without the male energy too, right? I mean, both are needed. Both are integral. Yeah, thanks for that question and comment. That's great. Any other comments, questions? All right, let's go on then to talk a little bit about the Buddha Tara. This is the rest of what we'll be doing tonight, is kind of going into this. Tara, the word in Sanskrit, literally means star. But the idea behind it is that you've got this root behind that says to guide across. This is what stars used to do in navigation, right? Before they had modern technology and ability to know where they were at on the ocean or the sea. They needed the stars above the sky and the sky to, guide them at night and say, yes, we're on track for the island that we're headed for because we know this particular constellation at this time of year and where it's going in terms of following that. So star or guide, this means that she's got this liberating activity. She's about guiding us and all beings out of the state of suffering, what we often call samsara, this cycle of existence going from life to life into liberation. So we often refer to her as Tara the Liberator, having that potential to help all beings to be completely liberated from everything that keeps them in that state of samsara. Tara also symbolizes the awakened activity of the Buddhas. Each of these Buddha figures, and you've got many different Buddha figures, we'll go, for example, over here to the one that's got all this huge halo of arms. This is 1,000-armed Chenrezig, or Avalokiteshvara is the Sanskrit. This is the Buddha of compassion, as many of you know. So that represents, in terms of the enlightened experience, the enlightened mind, the Dharmakaya, that element of compassion. That kind of dimension of compassion of the Buddha's experience. Then when we talk about the Buddha Tara, what Buddha Tara is representing is that enlightened activity, when all of that wisdom energy takes kind of root in the world and runs with it, kind of allows us to be able to have this awakening force in our lives. Because this is the only reason why Buddhas exist, is to help other sentient beings. So Tara is the awakened activity of the Buddhas, the enlightened energy of the Buddhas manifesting in our world. And I might even share a few stories that I've heard about green Tara that people have shared with me. And maybe some of you in the room have your own green Tara stories, but they sometimes give you chills because there is this force, and I have complete conviction of what we call this enlightened mind that can manifest in forms to help others. And that's kind of this Tara energy. So don't think too concretely about Tara as being like this set Buddha figure. It is a way that Buddha energy, Buddha mind, manifests in our world to help cut through the nonsense, remove the obstacles. In particular, this is green Tara's role, is to eliminate our obstacles and bring success in our spiritual practice. This is what she embodies. So, for example, if one wanted to enlarge one's compassion, one might use the figure of Chenrezig. But if one wants to really work on developing that type of cutting through energy, that wisdom manifesting in our world in that way, that is fully informed, that is fully developed, then one uses green Tara. So this is why a lot of the centers, use green Tara practice on a regular basis, is because those of you who run centers know that there are a lot of obstacles. Things come up all the time. There are financial obstacles, there are other obstacles with resources, with, developing the community, with whatever's going on. We always have to be concerned about that, creating that energy on an ongoing basis to try to keep cutting through all these obstacles. But it's helpful, and that's why, again, Geshe Lama Könchok gave me that advice when I went off to study for 7 years. In fact, my teacher, Geshe Jampa Gyatso, when I was the very first day of teaching in the master's program, he told us, he said, some of you in the room are going to experience financial obstacles. Some of you in the room are going to have health obstacles. Some of you in the room are going to have relationship obstacles. Some of you in the room, I kept going through the whole list, and we're all going, wow, it's going to be a long 7 years, But he said, it's so important that you find a way to just keep moving forward, to not let those obstacles become a problem. And so these types of practices help us to create that type of energy, to tap into that type of energy. Because again, the Buddhas are permeating this room right now. They're permeating all of existence right now. What we mean by the truth body of a Buddha is an enlightened mind that is not bounded like our minds are. They seem to be bounded in this little space here. Our mind, the Buddha mind, can go out wherever there are sentient beings. And green Tara represents that ability for those Buddhas to manifest that type of energy that will help cut through all the nonsense, help us get where we want to go, help us do what we want to do. So it's a really powerful energy that is, again, this wisdom manifesting in our world. Tara can be understood on many levels. I'm going to go through each of these first, but as we talk about her. And one is to identify that there is a sort of mythology or a story that is behind her as a personal or historical figure, that she actually is said to have existed in some form before she became enlightened, and there's a story behind that I'll share with you. Then we're going to look at how we can see her also, though, as a manifestation of enlightened qualities, just as we can see again with Chenrezig being the general embodiment of compassion, but then you get into all the various symbols, things he's holding, and what these various things are representing. They're all symbolic of what we mean by the enlightened qualities of a Buddha. And it's the same with green Tara. So we'll go into that. And then we'll look at it also, though, as the idea that it represents, green Tara for us represents our own Buddha potential in its fully evolved state, kind of like that tantric perspective, that this is the archetype or the pattern that we can look at to mold ourselves into through practices of deity yoga. Should you take that tantric route and get empowerment and so on, you can then visualize yourself in that form. But even to see her as that powerful kind of mirror for us that shows exactly what it's like when we will attain enlightenment, when we develop that full, evolution of our state. So let's talk about her as a person or a historical figure. I don't have any real slides for this. I'm going to share a little bit from, there's a wonderful book, by the way, that goes into Tara in more detail by Venerable Thupten Chodron. Many of you know her or heard of her. She was a student of Lama Yeshe's and Lama Zopa's, and she has her own organization now called Sravasti Abbey up in the northeast corner of Washington. And anyway, she wrote an article on this that ended up becoming, in a longer version, a book called How to Free Your Mind. And it's a really wonderful book if you want to explore Tara in more detail. But she gives two stories to kind of how we can look at Tara and see her history. And they're very symbolic of, again, what we're talking about here. And I'll read the full story for the first one. It says, many eons ago, in a different universe, galaxy far, far away. This is like Princess Leia, A princess named Yeshe Dawa lived. Based on her own investigation and experience, she came to have great confidence in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the three jewels. She understood the unsatisfactory nature of samsara, the cyclic existence, and thus determined to be free from all sufferings. Then, thinking that all living beings were like her in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering, Princess Yeshe Dawa developed genuine, impartial love and compassion for each and every living being. She was not enchanted by the luxuries of palace life. Instead, she vowed to show the way to liberation to millions of beings each day before eating breakfast, to millions more before eating lunch, and to even more before going to sleep at night. Because of this, she was called Arya Tara, meaning the noble liberator. Arya indicates that she's directly realized this emptiness, the nature of existence, and that many Buddhas had already and shows her liberating activity. When religious authorities, this is the real gist of the story of her as Yeshe Dawa, when religious authorities suggested that she pray to be born as a man in future lives, Tara refused, pointing out that many Buddhas had already manifested in male bodies. There's enough of that club. And vowing to attain full awakening in a woman's body and continuously return in female form in order to benefit others. So it does speak to kind of our own patriarchal history. And of course, many women, when they come into a room like this and see all the male figures, wonder, where are all the female figures? Well, they're there. We have a white Tara, that's a version of Tara, a green Tara, Prajnaparamita that I mentioned. In the higher forms of Tantra, you have Vajrayogini and this kind of very powerful female force. But nonetheless, there's not quite so many, right? It's not, there's a preponderance of those male forms. Well, she was quite wise in being kind of her own little Me Too movement here and telling, I'm tired of all the male energy in the world and tired of everyone telling me that it's superior in some ways. No, it's equally valid to attain enlightenment on a female form. So why say that you need to become a male? Of course, there are these distortions in the Buddhist teachings that think that you need a particular gender in order to manifest enlightenment. And of course, in our tradition, it's absolutely not so. You can manifest in either form in terms of your ability to attain enlightenment is within the human form and the subtle energies that we can tap into. So this is what the story represents in terms of that desire to put forward female energy, make sure that we have that represented in our world, represented in our iconography, represented in kind of how we practice. The second story that's told about Tara, though, is that she's also said to have been born from the tear of Chenrezig, of Avalokiteshvara. And the story there goes that as a bodhisattva, Avalokiteshvara, who's also known as Kuan Yin in the Chinese Buddhist literature and how they relate to that form, worked diligently to free all beings from the hell realms. And having achieved this, he rested a while. But then when he awoke, he turned his eyes to the hells and they were completely repopulated again. There's sentient beings born through the force of their karma there. It's all filled up again. So it's like all of the liberation that he did seemed useless because it filled right back up with more sentient beings who are suffering. For a moment he despaired and began to weep with sorrow for the plight of these ignorant beings. From one of his tears, Tara emerged and encouraged him on the bodhisattva path, saying, "Do not despair. I will help you to liberate all beings." Here once more we see those two forces, right? If we just have the compassion wing, without the full ability to know exactly what needs to be done, to be able to keep that energy going, to be able to make sure that we know there is an end in sight, there is an ability to actually do this work, well, then the compassion just gets exhausted. It falls into despair. Because if we look at the world around us and all we do is have that compassionate wish that beings not suffer, but we don't have the wisdom to help them to not suffer, to cut through their ignorance, to be able to help them in that way, well, then we're missing a component. We only have half of the story. It's not a totality. So both of these stories speak to kind of two of the ideas I've already spoken of in regard to male-female energy, embodied in kind of her own personal history. Any questions on that? Let's go on to the second topic that I want to talk about in regard to Tara. Her being a manifestation of enlightened qualities. Of course, we do have some Tara Tankas in the room, I believe, but this is a very dark photo on my screen. It's not quite as dark, but this is Green Tara. She's usually in this sitting position where oftentimes the Buddhas are with the lotus posture, which is, taught in a lot of yoga schools and what have you. In this case, she's got her left leg drawn in, but her right leg is extended out. You may not be able to see it quite so much. So that's symbolic. I'm going to go through each of these through the screens. And then she's also got this little mudra here, hand position in the left hand. That's actually called the mudra of the three jewels, of refuge in the three jewels, because there are three here. And the thumb and the ring finger together. And it's holding a lotus, right? That lotus is blooming over here by her left ear. And then she's got her other hand draping over her right knee. And this is a mudra of kind of bestowing blessings and what have you. We'll talk about that in a moment. And oftentimes in that one, though it's not quite so clear in that picture, and I'm not sure it's even in the original Tanka, she's got her fingers together like this, holding another lotus. So they're usually kind of two lotuses, these blue utpala or lotus flowers. All right, so that's just to give you a little visual to go with this. And of course, she's very youthful. She's got this beautiful smiling face. But let's go into the individual details. The first thing is, of course, starting off with the female form already indicates that we're talking about a wisdom that is being manifested, that is important to, put it in that category. We're mostly talking about the wisdom wing that we require. The green color, of course, green in our world, when things are green, they're growing, right? They have life to them. So it symbolizes activity and success, things coming into fruition. things growing, having that kind of ability to move forward as opposed to being stagnant and unproductive. Her body posture expresses her inner realizations and her outer activities. That she's got both of those kind of things going on. Again, sometimes you see Buddhas and it's all kind of drawn in, like it's all the internal energy. But she's got this outward type of thing. The right hand going outward, the right leg going outward. We're going to look at those in regard to what they individually mean. But the hand mudras that I mentioned, as I said, this is granting supreme realizations with the right and the three jewels, the mudra of the three jewels. So she has this kind of firm basis with regard to her refuge or her safe direction that she is relying upon, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. But then she has this outward extending of those qualities and realizations to others. This combination of both of these, inner and outer qualities and activities. And again, if there are two lotuses in her hands, which is in many of the tankas, many of the paintings, then they symbolize these two factors of purity and power. Purity, which is what comes about through wisdom. Wisdom is the ultimate purification. It is the way that we will be able to completely purify our minds. We can't purify fully without wisdom. No matter how strong our compassionate motivation is, no matter how strong we want to become a Buddha, the force of purification is through wisdom. And then power being the other lotus, and it comes through the force of that manifesting in the world, kind of being active and doing things. Both of those being absolutely essential to accomplishing the task, accomplishing the inner realizations that will then manifest in the ability to benefit others, to come to the aid of others. So these two factors of kind of purity and power are very important in terms of demonstrating the full development of Aryatara, so we can completely rely upon her. Then she has various ornaments, and again, in the pictures it'll look differently in each one, but you have often jeweled necklaces, you have armlets, you have anklets around her ankles, you have earrings, and on her crown. These adornments represent what are often called the six perfections, the six paramitas. These are practices done by those who are intent upon enlightenment, what we call bodhisattvas, and they manifest in the state of enlightenment as perfections. The fully qualified perfection is when one is a Buddha. And those six are generosity, which again is part of this method wing, morality, patience, joyous effort, concentration, and then wisdom. So again, generosity, morality, patience, enthusiasm or joyous effort, and then concentration, and then the final one, wisdom. So she's adorned because she has all of these qualities. They're fully integrated into her being, and they adorn every activity that she does. She never is parted from these practices of the six perfections. Now, that outward extension on the right side, of her right hand and foot, emphasize the method side. Remember, there's that wing of compassion, that compassionate activity that is intent upon coming to the aid of others. This is why Tara is a very powerful being to invoke when we're having difficulties or problems. When GPS isn't working and you're lost or something. You want that kind of energy that's going to come to your aid quickly, that's going to be there, that compassionate action in the world. The inward drawing of the left hand's up here, and the foot is closer inside, it's tucked inside, indicates her inner peace that's gained through realizing emptiness. She's never, there's never any conflict in Tara's mind because she's totally in touch with how things exist. And from that space of being totally in touch, she can then be quite active in the world in the most powerful ways. So it's this nice combination that we get with Tara that is sort of, although we're emphasizing the wisdom side of it, it's what happens when that wisdom, being fully developed, can manifest quickly in the world. Maybe I'll tell you one of these stories that I did here. This was told to me by a good friend of mine who was a Zen practitioner, but she liked to come to our center in Santa Fe. She was studying and staying up at Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe, which is Joan Halifax Roshi's center, a really wonderful center. And she would come down, and one time we were talking about Tara, and she told me this story, because she used to live she's from Wales, and she said there was a center there, I think it's called Lamrim Center, and it's kind of in the woods, and there's a lot of territory around that people can explore. And there was one day when a woman went out wandering who was staying at the center, and by dusk she hadn't come back, and people started getting worried, and they were wondering what had happened to her. And it starts getting even darker, and they go to the geshe who was there, and apparently he was in the upstairs room, and the gompa, like this, was downstairs. And they went up to see him, and he said, well, I want you to go down into the gompa and start doing the praises to the 21 Taras, really invoke Tara to have this, something happen for this woman to be able to be safe and what have you. And so they started chanting, and they're chanting the 21 Taras, and and then all of a sudden they hear him kind of thump his foot on the ceiling, like, okay, you can stop now. And within minutes, this woman appeared, and they asked her what had happened. And she said, well, I was out, on a hike and wandering around in the woods, and I got lost, and I could not figure out where the center was. And then as it got dark, all of a sudden I saw this green light, and she followed the green light, and she came back to the center, and there's no green light there. It's not like they have a flashing Tara outside the center. And this is how she came back. And of course, the combination of the students kind of coming together, creating that energy at the request of the guru, and this was a manifestation that the woman that Lee said she saw, she didn't know what they were doing. She walked in, and they were already done reciting their green Taras and all this, and she said she was guided there by a green light. And I've heard other stories. I won't mention one of them because, I think if other people tell me stories that are their own stories, that's their story. But, someone that I hear it from someone else, then I think it's maybe okay. But I have to admit, I've invoked Tara at times. Even when I had already been reciting the 21 Taras for a bit, when I actually left San Francisco to get on the flight to go over to Italy to begin my studies, the shuttle that I took, the super shuttle or whatever, had picked me up at the hotel I was staying at, because I had moved out of my residence and all that, so I only had a couple of nights. I stayed at a hotel, and they picked me up really early, and it was just starting to get really heavy traffic on the freeway when we were coming down 101 to go to the airport. And we were in the fast lane, and all of a sudden the shuttle completely stopped. And here we are in the fast lane, and this traffic is all trying to go around us and honking at us and everything. And so I said, okay, I'll start doing the praises to 21 Taras. And I started reciting it, and it started. Somehow he got it to start again. But it were a few times where he just and I was thinking, oh God, I'm going to miss my flight. I'm not going to get to Italy, all this stuff. But I was just really saying, well, I really want to do this, but I want to get back in touch with my motivation, what have you. And it started, and it got out to the airport. I don't know if that's really, Tara's force, but it's worthwhile trying it. Why not? Use that energy to kind of help cut through, especially when you're engaging in something virtuous, something that will be a benefit. If it's just that you want to get first in line so you can get the best cake at the bakery or something, well then maybe Tara is not the best to invoke for that, because it's just all about your crazy desire for that cake. But nonetheless, this is a powerful force in our spiritual path that is there to be tapped into. As I said, this force is everywhere in this world, because Buddhas permeate everywhere. The analogy that's often used for Buddhas is that they're like the sun shining in the sky. Well, who determines whether you experience the rays of the sun? You. The sun's always shining, and we don't have the ability to experience the sun's rays when the planet's, we're on the other side of it, and we don't have the sun rays directly. But nonetheless, when the sun rays are there, we can say that it's our choice if we want to be inside, protected from the rays, not experiencing it, or we want to be outside in the full glory of the sun. Well, it's the same with the Buddha's enlightened energy. It's permeating everywhere all the time. It's up to your own karma, your own openness and ability to tap into that through your own actions, your own practice. So this is what she's really representing, is this kind of ability for, coming to our aid, being of great benefit to us and to all beings, because she liberates from all fears, from all dangers. So the third idea as our Buddha potential in its fully evolved state is where we acknowledge that once more Tara can be used as a sort of template for how we go about attaining enlightenment. This is the tantric method. In Tantra, once more, we are trying to, after being empowered in a particular deity, and don't just go running around getting kind of all kinds of empowerments, you really should think about and maybe even consult with the Lama that you trust to see what is it that's in line with your energy. What is a good practice for you to do? But many people do the practice of green Tara and try to embody that because it is awakening a lot of the things within us that we need to awaken. And it's a very simple form to work with. I mean, if you take the Kala Chakra initiation, which some of you in the room may have, you're talking about this very complex being with an amazing number of arms and legs and 722 beings in their mandala. I mean, it's like a huge visualization. I'm not saying don't do it, but it's big. Green Tara is like green Tara. And it's interesting, green Tara is the same form in all the levels of Tantra. It doesn't get more complex when you get up to highest Yoga Tantra. This is the highest Yoga Tantra form of green Tara and the lowest form in Tantra. That's what Tara is like, throughout all of those practices. It's kind of a unique thing. I think John Landau pointed that out in his book on Images of Enlightenment. So anyway, I won't go into all the detail of how one practices this, but essentially when you gain empowerment into Tara, for example, green Tara, you then can practice what's called a sadhana. Sadhana is a Sanskrit word which means the means of accomplishment. It's how you accomplish becoming Tara. And it essentially has various components to it. Oftentimes it involves visualizing a front visualization of Aryatara that you use as a foundation for your practice, and then from that you eventually arise in the form of Aryatara yourself. And you do all these various practices that support you being that Buddha right now. The whole emphasis in Tantra is to say that I'm not going to wait until I create all these causes to achieve Buddhahood way out there sometime in the future. I'm going to think I'm fully enlightened right now. Why? Because you have Buddha nature right now. You have the Buddha potential right now. You have all of the seeds of that within you right now. You're just going to pretend that it's all manifesting in this moment and pretend that you're a Buddha. It's a sort of dress rehearsal for Buddhahood that you just keep practicing. And you actually are said to be able, through this practice and through deep visualization, especially when you unite it with a lot of very deep meditative stabilization, to be able to achieve these states, to be able to first have a full imagination of all of this, but then it to become actuality, for it to become the illusory body. This step that helps you to get then to becoming a Buddha yourself, having that fully enlightened state. And all the Buddhas that are in the tantric practices can be practiced in this way. We're just emphasizing that Tara herself does show us what it's like to have that Buddha potential manifested in a fully evolved state that we can use as a template for our own enlightenment. And again, there's not a lot of power behind doing it if you don't have a tantric initiation or empowerment into green Tara. And I'm using those equivalent, initiation or empowerment. It simply means a ceremony that is conducted that's very complete, that allows you to have permission and ability to manifest in that form in your visualization. It's all in your visualization, all through imagination, until you create deeper causes that allow you to have this illusory body, to be appearing in that form in a very subtle way. And then eventually that to even ripen into a fully enlightened state. We all have that potential. This is actually what I'm going to be teaching on, not the tantric component of it as much, but the sutra presentation of Buddha potential or Buddha nature tomorrow night in San Francisco, and then all day Saturday as well. It's a really important topic for us to be aware of, that every single being has that seed of enlightenment within themselves, because it's essentially because they have mind, and mind in its deepest state is pure, is completely free of all the crazy thoughts and delusions and everything that we have. It is like a glass of water that has that absolute clarity and purity that is simply obscured by dirt. We've got a lot of dirt in our water that we keep stirring up and keep agitating, and so it's not clear. We see it as opaque. We aren't able to see reality. We aren't able to relate to things correctly. But it doesn't mean you can't do that. Because we know if we take that dirty glass of water and put it through a very fine filter, the clarity of the water is returning. It was always there. We just didn't know it was there. We identify with the dirt so much that we miss the clarity of the water. But we are really the clarity of the water. What is at your fundamental core of your being is that clear light mind. And all of what pollutes it, all of these impurities, they're there adventitiously. Adventitiously means that they come and go on the basis of causes and conditions. But when we remove those causes and conditions, they don't come anymore. You know? They're only there because we keep creating the causes for them to be there. So this is the process by which we can attain enlightenment in Tantra, is to have that understanding that we have this Buddha potential. So therefore, we're going to identify with that. We're going to try to be in touch with that clear mind that is going to manifest in these pure forms, as Tara, as Chenrezig, as whoever it is that we're practicing. So Tantra's got a very powerful way of approaching enlightenment. But this is another way that we can understand Tara. So we've looked at her as kind of this historical figure that we can talk about who she was and what she represents, as a manifestation of enlightened qualities that she represents and is symbolic of everything that we're trying to achieve. The union of those two, of method and wisdom, in a manifest form where it's coming to the aid of others. And then as our Buddha potential in its fully enlightened state, as a template by which we can become enlightened ourselves. Any questions up to this point before we go to that question? Yes, Claudia.
When you recite the praises to 21 Taras, so do you then evoke white Tara also, or is it specifically green Tara, or just kind of all Taras?
Yeah, I mean, it's specifically green Tara that these are said to be kind of in the entourage of green Tara. So I would use it mostly with green Tara. Now, you'll get different descriptions of what the 21 Taras are in How to Free Your Mind, the book I mentioned by Venerable Thupten Chodron. There are actually line drawings of each of them. And in that presentation, they all look somewhat similar, maybe have different faces, but they have a very similar female form. But nonetheless, in some of the other teachings on those 21 Taras, you might find them in very wildly different forms, like huge wrathful beings that are not feminine looking at all in terms of their physical form. So, all of those are said to be, again, don't take anyone as being absolute. There are different versions of these, just like there are different versions of what we call the 35 confession Buddhas that will manifest in different ways, and it's okay. You don't have to feel this conflict of what's going on. But generally, they're all in the retinue of green Tara, because they all represent a variety of facets of how we can be a benefit to others, how we can extend out to others. This is why you would want more forms of yourself. And they even say that as the Bodhisattva develops their mind, they do, even before they're a Buddha, develop the ability to manifest a variety of forms, to be able to be in various worlds at the same time, to have their consciousness have that experience in different bodies, which is pretty outrageous too. But nonetheless, these 21 Taras are said to be kind of manifestations of that same type of energy that green Tara represents, but with each kind of having a specific purpose. I won't go into all of that detail tonight. But so yes, green Tara. White Tara in general is a practice that we invoke when we want to create causes for long life, good health, those kinds of things. So it's quite specific to that type of idea. And even it's a practice like if you want to create the causes for someone's good life, you can use the mantra to kind of insert their name, or to use it with the I pronoun that is in the Sanskrit and so on. You can find a way to kind of invoke that type of energy to help cut through any of those sorts of obstacles. But it's used quite specifically around long life. In some traditions, I think in the Nyingma tradition, they have a red Tara. I don't know quite what she symbolizes. And I think there's a yellow Tara out there somewhere. I mean, there's different versions of it, but they all kind of have a commonality in terms of being that wisdom energy that is manifesting in these ways. In this case, with green Tara, it's the wisdom energy that becomes enlightened activity, that becomes that force to help sentient beings. So, whereas white Tara is more of the energy to help beings have a very long life, to have the ability to make this life very useful by extending the years of this life. So, yes.
It sounds like you can do the practice on your own, doing the 21 taras.
Sure.
You can attend a puja, but there's this formal like initiation you go through, and that allows you to visualize that you're green tara. Because in some of the exercises I've done at home, there's a little bit of that where you imagine you
kind of
emerge, and that you're the mind of green tara, and then you imagine all sentient beings as well.
Yeah. Can I ask what your name is?
I'm Doug.
Hi, Doug. I'm Don. Yeah. What Doug's question, I mean, it's a really good one, because a lot of these sadhanas or these practice forms, they do talk about that because they're intended primarily for people who've done the initiation to have that full instruction of kind of emerging in that form, or thinking if there's nothing wrong with doing the practice. And even when you do have that idea of like green tara maybe coming to the crown of your head and dissolving into you, to feel like you're blessing your body, speech, and mind, and having that strong wish to become just like Tara, but to actually visualize yourself out of emptiness arising in the form of Aryatara, which is often in some of these sadhanas, that does require an empowerment. So nothing wrong with doing the practice, nothing wrong with coming to the puja. It's just when that instruction is given around, and now dissolve things into emptiness and arise in the form of Aryatara, or sometimes it's just abbreviated, it might just say, and then you arise in the form of Aryatara. I mean, I don't want to say that there's something wrong with it. It's not like you're committing some huge negative action by doing it. There's just not the juice behind it. You haven't done the empowerment with the Lama, which is a very important part of the process, because it's a mutual meditation that is done. Don't think that these empowerments are some like secret ceremony or something. It's a meditation where you're being given instruction by the Lama on what you are to visualize and how you are to engage with the transmission of that kind of energy and everything. It's a bit esoteric again, but nonetheless a necessary part of it. But don't go running into these things, like I said, especially without having checked out the Lama, making sure that this is someone you feel a connection with. Because as part of the ceremony, and as follows from there on, you want to see them as a Buddha. You want to see them as that essence manifesting in physical form to be able to help you on your path. So you really have to have that idea of the indifferentiability of the Buddha and the Guru, that they're absolutely one. So the Buddha and the Guru and Aryatara in the empowerment have to be seen as one. This is an important part of tantric practice in particular, because otherwise you're just receiving something from an ordinary being, and an empowerment has to be given from a Buddha, and so you have to see the Guru as being a Buddha. Now, and many people in our tradition think that our gurus are Buddhas, right? Because how else are Buddhas manifesting in the world? Yeah. We might be able to invoke this Tara energy to come as like something to start the super shuttle on the freeway, but I know that's some kind of energy, or a green light that appears outside of the Gompa of some place in Wales. But how do we have a day-to-day influence of the Buddhas in our lives? Through our gurus, through our teachers that are giving us empowerment, that are helping us to ripen our own minds. So some people may already have some conviction that there are Buddhas in this world who are in those forms, but we don't know what forms Buddhas are. You all could be Buddhas for all I know. I don't have any way of knowing whether you're Buddha or not, because even many of these guides that we have, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he'll just say, "I'm just a simple monk. No great qualities. Don't look at me. I don't really have a lot." But most of us think he's got a lot more going on there. This is just giving the appearance of humility. That is an important quality for us to have as well. So anyway, that's a long answer to your question, but absolutely, you have permission to do any of the practices of green Tara. Just keep in mind that there's parts of it that might be worded in a way that would be just for practitioners of Tantra. Sometimes just what we call the lower Tantra of action Tantra, sometimes highest yoga Tantra, like the green Tara Puja that's generally done at centers. It's called Chidimani Tara Puja, and that is a highest yoga Tantra practice. So ideally, even if you've had a lower initiation into Tara, you shouldn't visualize yourself as Tara as part of that practice, because it's not the particular energy of that practice, if you will. So good. Thanks, Doug. Thank you for that question. Yeah, Jenny, did you want to say something? Yeah.
I was sitting here and I'm getting this vibrations, okay?
Uh-huh.
So it has to do with Master Chokoksui,
Oh, your master,
my
yeah.
master of
Yeah.
energy healing, prana healing.
Uh-huh.
And in the guidance through him, I think I'm directed to share this
Okay.
now, okay?
Alright.
That when we are faced with obstacles,
Uh-huh.
and it was manifested in the Philippines when we were supposed to be at a very important meeting, and there was so much traffic
Mm.
that we seemed like we couldn't get through,
Right.
and we were guided to, with the mantra, Om Tare, Tutare, Ture, Soha.
Mm.
And we were guided to repeat this.
Oh, wonderful.
Everyone, Om Tare, Tutare, Ture,
The
Soha.
mantra of green Tara.
And it just cleared.
Yeah.
It cleared the way.
Yeah.
And so not me, but
Mm.
I'm guided
Wonderful.
to share this so that
Thank you,
I think
Jenny.
possibly everyone in here may be able to use this
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Stuck.
Yeah, if you can't recite the whole 21 Tara praises, and maybe just, even to recite that mantra. I'll put the mantra up on the screen in a little bit because I am going to talk about it, but it's a powerful mantra because it does have deep meaning in the words. Yes, Lucy.
I understand green Tara helps clear the path. How is that different from like Vajrapani or like the wisdom part of Tara? How is that different from Manjushri?
So again, Lucy and Isaac were at the retreat I did at Vajrapani last weekend, and I talked about these three kind of being the embodiment. We often talk about them as what Lama Tsongkhapa, the founder of our tradition, represents is Chenrezig, or Avalokiteshvara, compassion. Then you have Manjushri, usually representing wisdom, and Vajrapani representing power. I don't know, I think Tara's got kind of all three to some extent, but I guess the wisdom part of it is just another manifestation of wisdom in that active form. Again, because we're kind of uniting, in my mind, with compassionate method, the power, the ability to actually do something from that place of wisdom, which is an important thing to recognize, again, because the wisdom alone, and this is where each of these beings, Buddhas, represent some component of the enlightened mind, some facet of this jewel that is the Buddhist mind. It's not to say that, again, any one of them is good enough completely on its own. Because if all we have is the wisdom, but we lack the compassion, and we lack the power or the ability to do that, well then that compassion is somewhat paralyzed. It doesn't have the ability to really know what needs to be done or to actually do it. So Tara's got this kind of blend of stuff going on that is really kind of interesting. While she's mostly grounded in wisdom, again being female in form, it's representing wisdom, but it's a different form of that wisdom that is informed by our compassion to be active in the world, to do what needs to be done. So it's a bit of all three again. I don't know, I've never heard an exact explanation in relation to those three, because that's the way we could talk about the qualities of a Buddha, is that they have both of these wings fully developed, but on the basis of that, the power to do something in the world to affect others. So they're not just like a fully developed being hanging around in some Buddha land somewhere. They're active in the world. They're actually doing what needs to be done, which is that Vajrapani energy in a sense. So I don't know if you could identify her strictly with any one of these, but nonetheless we do say it's that wisdom that is at the core of all of it, manifesting in this very skillful, compassionate form to help others. Yeah. Thank you all. And thank you, Jenny, for sharing that too, by the way. We'll extend the gratitude. So let's go through a few more slides. And there's a part of this lecture I may not have the time to do, and that's okay. I'll go into a few of the things. You're welcome to read Venerable Thupten Chodron's book, which goes into these verses in more detail. But I first want to just touch briefly, because I've only talked in kind of very cursory words about this wisdom that liberates us and liberates all sentient beings. So this is the wisdom that realizes emptiness. Emptiness, many of you have heard this word before. It's not meant to be this nothingness or some nihilistic kind of bent. It's speaking to the fact that everything that exists lacks a particular way of existing that right now we think exists. So as I did in the weekend at Vajrapani, we were talking about emptiness. I'm going to use the example of a dream because I think it's one of the best examples. I really like it as an example. The Buddha gave it as an example, so I've got the Buddha to, give credit to in this regard. He said that when we talk about a dream, if your dreams are like mine, again, I have no idea what your dreams are like because I don't know your minds, but they're probably like mine, and that once you get into this deep sleep and you start dreaming, you're believing in the reality of your dream. All these various things are appearing. You're in some dream landscape in some bizarre world and all this stuff is happening, or maybe it's a familiar world that is, whatever it is, it's appearing to you as if it's real, meaning as real as when you're awake, right? Because if you weren't thinking it's as real as when you're awake, then you'd be lucidly dreaming and knowing that it's not real, right? But most of us keep buying into the reality of our dream appearances. This is why we have the potential for even great emotions to come up in our dreams. You can wake up from a dream feeling great fear, right? If it's a nightmare and you're like, oh my gosh, I was really scared this thing was going to kill me. Well, was there a thing there that was going to kill you? Only in your dream mind, only as a product of all these things that create dreams. It wasn't a real object that was going to kill you. So if we look at our reality outside of the dream world, we see that it's a similar thing according to what the Buddha says. Everything that appears to us seems to be self-established on its own, real, to use Lama Zopa's word, in that way. Because this is how we see reality. We think that the cup is out here and this bowl is out here with its own identity established on the side of this stuff. But nonetheless, if we investigate, and the tools are given there for us to investigate, we can see that things lack that way of existing. Just like in our dream, if we're able to lucidly dream, we can see that the dream objects aren't real in the way that they appear. So this is why the dream analogy is quite effective, because it shows us a case where we might be able to, if you are able to lucidly dream, which is a wonderful skill to have, you can see that what's appearing to you just has an appearance. It seems to exist in a particular way, but you know it doesn't exist in that way. Well, through deep reasoning and analysis, you can come to know emptiness in a more conceptual way and come to understand that how things appear as if they are established out there on their own, even this person on its own, independent of various factors. We can come to see that that's an illusion, that's appearing in one way but existing in a completely different way. I'm not going to go into huge detail about this because that would be like the whole rest of the evening into tomorrow morning, but but pursue these teachings when you feel ready into emptiness, because it is important that we support the development of this wisdom wing with the deepest level of wisdom we can have, not just understanding karma and other teachings that the Buddha gave that are about our conventional reality, but understanding the ultimate reality, the way things exist when we do that deeper investigation. We come to see that there is that illusory quality. They're appearing in one way, but existing in a very different way. So this is the wisdom that really liberates. This is what green Tara really symbolizes, is that ability to see the truth once and for all. That truth that sets you free, that will absolutely cause you to be liberated. And you can't just invoke Aryatara to do that. Say, please, help cut through my ignorance. It's good to have some support, because that's why, once more, why we need our guides, why we need gurus, is because they give us that wisdom and help us to practice it, help us to incorporate it in our minds in a correct way so that we can develop the right view of emptiness. But again, this is just a few words about that. So the mantra of Tara, which Jenny was mentioning, was used in the Philippines at the time to kind of clear all of the traffic and what have you. It consists of these syllables. Again, Om Tare Tutare Turi Soha. I've got all of them together on the last slide. The very first kind of header of this mantra is the word Om. And Om is a very powerful word because it essentially represents the enlightened body, speech, and mind of all the Buddhas. These are what are often called the three doors, the three ways that kind of energy manifests. Is that it manifests in terms of mind primarily, but then speech and then our physical embodiment and what we do with our bodies. So the enlightened body, speech, and mind of all the Buddhas is represented in that simple word Om, that is often the header for mantras like in Om Mani Padme Hum and various other mantras anyway. Tare, tutare, ture. These words are all very kind of similar in terms of having this T and Re, this tare, tutare, ture. They kind of represent 3 levels of liberation. Now, some presentations will relate them to the 3 levels of the path to enlightenment. Remember I mentioned in our motivation tonight, wanting to be free from bad rebirths, to have a good rebirth, wanting to be liberated from samsara yourself, wanting to become enlightened to help all beings. These are the 3 levels of the Lam Rim, and you could correlate tare tutare turi with that advancement of one's mind through those deeper states to eventually attaining Buddhahood. But nonetheless, there's another presentation that is given where the first one is liberating from suffering, which is many of you have heard of the 4 Noble Truths. This is the first Noble Truth, that the Buddha taught that life is unsatisfactory. That is what we often call dukkha, the Sanskrit word. It means more than what we normally think of as suffering. It means dissatisfaction, a state that we can come to see is not satisfactory. That's the first of these 3 parts of the mantra, tare. Tutare means liberating from the 8 dangers, the second Noble Truth. These are the 8 dangers that if I've got time, I'll go through a few of these. I'm sure I'll have some time. Don't know that I'll get to all 8, but we'll at least touch on them so you know what they are. They're all related to the delusions. They're all related to the problems in our own minds that are fundamentally being driven by our own ignorance. And ignorance is even one of those 8 dangers. But that's the causes of our suffering, the second Noble Truth. Yes, you do suffer because of your karma as well, your actions, but the main driving force behind our karma, what we do in the world through our body, speech, or mind, is the delusions, what we have in our own minds that cause us to have these experiences in samsara that are unsatisfactory. So the first and the second Noble Truth are kind of taught in tandem. You're in a state of dukkha, that it's unsatisfactory. Why? Because of these causes. Your own karma, but mainly your own delusions, these 8 dangers, these 8 states of mind that are problematic for us, that keep us creating energy that only keeps us in the wheel of existence going from life to life. Ture, the last of these 3, liberates from disease, but by disease, we don't mean just physical disease, we mean the mental disease that is ignorance. That is this deepest ignorance that is overcome by the wisdom realizing emptiness that I just talked about. All of that is representing then the third Noble Truth, the fact that we can be completely liberated from our suffering when we finally remove that ignorance, when we finally get rid of that ignorance. The full liberation occurs of the cessation of our dukkha at that point, and that's arrived at through the 4th Noble Truth, which is the path, the true path that leads to the end of all of our suffering. So those 2 truths, the 3rd and the 4th, are often called the true cessation of dukkha, and then the true path that leads to that cessation. So again, Lama Zopa has a wonderful new book out on the 4 Noble Truths. You can read up on the 4 Noble Truths, but essentially this is speaking to how we have to be free of our suffering, free of all the causes of our suffering, free especially of the deepest cause of our suffering. Because otherwise, we will continue to be not liberated, continue to be bound up in samsara. We have to practice the path to do that. Again, we can invoke Aryatara and use her energy, but it's up to us to practice the path. It's up to us to generate the realizations in our own minds. The final syllable, and there's the full mantra, Om Tare, Tutare, Ture, Soha. Did I have Tutare spelled right on the previous one? No, I had a missing T. I think there are 2 T's in it. Or maybe it's 1 T. Maybe I have 2 T's in this. I'll have to go back. Is it 2? Yeah. Let me look at her sheet here where she's got it on her description. Yeah, it's 2. It's 2. Tutari. I don't spell it out so often, so I'm sorry I missed it on that previous slide. The final syllable, sometimes pronounced soha or swaha, this is may this happen. So we're kind of saying, in essence, invoking this enlightened aspects of the Buddhas with the Om, and then saying, liberation from suffering, liberation from the causes of suffering, the 8 dangers, liberation from the ignorance that's at the root of the suffering. May this happen. So it's a very powerful mantra that's invoking any removal of whatever we're experiencing, cutting through all those obstacles. All right? And by the way, I've made these slides available to Urs so he can insert them as he needs to in the video recording of this, but you're certainly welcome to share them with anybody, of course with my mistakes in them too. All the mistakes are mine. I take full ownership. Let's look at these 80. Well, let me see if there are any questions on that. Now again, you would use the mantra of Tara to some degree in your practice. Certainly all of these sadhanas have some invoking of that mantra. It might not be in a formal recitation, but if you do what is called the approximation retreat of green Tara, say you do get an empowerment into green Tara, and then you go into meditation retreat where you practice 4 times a day doing these sessions where you're visualizing yourself in the form of Arya Tara and doing all these activities of sending out energy and what have you. You often recite the mantra and you count the mantras, and you're supposed to do, I think the first level is 100,000, but ideally you're supposed to do a lot more than that. But it's very easy. It's a very brief mantra, very quick, you can get it accomplished. I think we did a Green Tara retreat in less than 10 days in Italy with our teacher, Geshe Jampa Gyatso. And then we even had the fire puja after and all that to kind of make it more formal. But, this is a powerful way of invoking that type of energy, that liberating, cutting energy, that desire to have all of this stuff removed. So, again, whether you can recite the 21 praises or even just recite the mantra, very powerful, or even just invoke Tara. What are the 8 dangers that were mentioned in that second, the tutare? The 8 dangers are obstacles on the path in our own minds. Again, they in these verses that we're going to see these were composed by, I think it was Gendendrip, the first Dalai Lama. Am I right in that? Let me look and see. The first Dalai Lama, who was a disciple of Lama Tsongkhapa's. He composed these verses that speak to these 8 dangers, and he gives them a physical form. We're going to see the lion of pride and so on, all these various, sometimes various human beings or other beings, animals, what have you, different things, even inanimate objects, things to represent those. But they're most important not to be seeing them as something outside of ourselves. These are obstacles we have in our own minds. Distorted ways of looking at things and distorted ways of relating to others that become problematic for us, that keep us from liberation. So they have external and internal aspects. The external ones threaten our life or our property, so we can see that they do manifest in the world, and we might not encounter some of these in our life, but nonetheless they can be symbolic of that. But the most important ones are the internal ones that endanger us spiritually, that keep us from really advancing our minds in the direction of Buddhahood. So how does Tara protect you from these 8 dangers? Depending on Tara's wisdom by which she guides you, you liberate yourself from these. This is once more the Buddhist path. The Buddha himself said that, the Buddhas don't liberate in the way that you would kind of take a thorn out of a hand. They can't remove all of our suffering just like that. They don't liberate in the way of like washing dirt from a cloth. They don't liberate in the way of kind of taking what they've realized and planting it in each of our heads, so we can have the same realizations. How do the Buddhas liberate? By teaching the Dharma. So if we are able to tap into Tara's wisdom, meaning the wisdom realizing emptiness, and of course all the other wisdom that helps us to address these delusions, these obstacles, these dangers, then we will be liberated. But it's this kind of, there's a synchronicity that needs to happen there. We need to be in line with what Arya Tara is telling us, teaching us, giving us in terms of her wisdom, and through the force of our own practice of that, we will be able to accomplish this. So while we can ask Tara to save us from these dangers, we are actually calling upon our inner Tara, the seeds of our own wisdom and compassion. Even I was talking about the gurus. They say that the role of the outer guru, if you are fortunate enough to find those beings who can play that role for you, it can be one person, it can be many people, is to awaken your inner guru. That's the only role that they're there to play, is for you to awaken your own deepest wisdom and compassion within yourself. Because we all have that Buddha nature, that Buddha potential that is at the core of our being, that needs to simply be awakened. It needs to arrive at a much more prominent place in our lives. So, first we practice the temporal antidotes for each of them, and I'll go through a few of these. We've got time for a few, and talk about how do we kind of counteract them in the moment through something that will be the opposite of those. But then we have to have an ultimate antidote eventually. I taught on these previously on another visit to Ocean of Compassion, where I went into kind of how we let go of our afflicted states of mind through practicing these temporal antidotes, through being able to apply something in the moment that is quite intentional, but then eventually to apply the wisdom realizing emptiness, which is the only way that you're going to get rid of all of this and become completely liberated. You can be, somewhat liberated from them manifesting through the temporal antidotes, but that's not getting at removing them. So all of these are taught by the Buddha to help us reduce and then eventually eliminate these dangers. The real protection then is the Dharma, the true paths that are realizations of emptiness and the true cessations that occur on the basis of those. Again, the third and the fourth noble truths that we absolutely, of course here it's the fourth and third in terms of the order, but those two we absolutely have to rely upon in the end. There's no other way out. Again, if Green Tara or any other Buddha could liberate you right now from all your suffering, they've got the compassion to do it. They would do it in an instant. Well, why can't they do it? Because again, that's not how Buddhas liberate sentient beings. They liberate through teaching the Dharma, the means for us to liberate ourselves. That's why that wonderful book by Pavanka Rinpoche, Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. It's like right there, we just have to practice it. But it is in your hand, in your court. It's for you to practice. All right, so these eloquent verses that we're going to look at were composed by the first Dalai Lama, Gendon Drupa, after he had completed a meditation retreat on Tara. So he came out of this retreat inspired to share this kind of experience of these 8 dangers. Let's go through the Lion of Pride, which is the first one. Actually, let's read this together. I like reading verses together. It kind of gives an opportunity to just kind of get engaged. Dwelling in the mountains of wrong views of selfhood, puffed up with holding itself superior, it claws other beings with contempt. The Lion of Pride, please protect us from this danger. So this is like invoking Tara to say, please help me to address this pride and get this pride out of the way, because pride is a huge obstacle on our spiritual path, right? It keeps you in this place of thinking that you know it all, that you've got everything that it takes, and that what other people have to share with you or that what you could learn from them is valueless. If you are able to practice the opposite of humility, kind of be down in that place of wanting to always look at others as superior, always look at what is it that this person can teach me? How can I learn from them? How can I use this as a means to help awaken my own compassion, wisdom, what have you? Well, then you're going to be much more benefited by all the exchanges you have with every single being. So how do we overcome our pride on a temporal basis? Well, one of the antidotes, they say, is to think about all the things that you don't know. Kind of put yourself in the place of recognizing that there's a lot of knowledge out there that we simply don't possess. This one of the texts they say for you to kind of read or look at in order to have that experience of, wow, I really don't know a lot, is one of the texts we studied in the master's program. And believe me, it's very humbling. It's a text called The Treasury of Manifest Knowledge, Abhidharma Kosha by Vasubandhu. And it's encyclopedic, and it just goes on, and you just get all this information, and you just go, geez, I'm impressed. This guy really knows his stuff, and I have no idea what he's talking about. It was the hardest course of the entire master's program. But nonetheless, anything that kind of allows you, and even just thinking about, well, if I'm such great stuff, why aren't I enlightened yet? Look at the fact that, we haven't attained those loftier goals. So just get back down to that place of more humility. There's a wonderful analogy that's used in Tibet, because of course in Tibet you have those huge, tall mountains. They say you don't want to be like the mountains because there's nothing growing on the mountaintop, right? It's all barren. It's well above the tree line. You want to be down at the lower place of the valley. Why? Because that's where all the water collects. All the water that melts, all the snow, it goes down into the valleys and makes very rich, lush terrain. So that's where you want to be, is the humble mind that is willing to be looking at others as superior in that way, to think everyone has something to teach me. Even the homeless person on the street potentially has something to teach you. Everyone we meet has some lesson we can learn. But if we're closed to that, if we feel we're superior in whatever way, especially with regard to our learning, then it becomes this lion that claws others with contempt, that, looks down upon others, judges others. It's a really nasty state of mind that, is manifest sometimes. So, this is again dwelling in the mountains of wrong views of selfhood. That's where our pride comes from, as do all these delusions. But it's mentioned here in particular because the I is at the center of a prideful mind, right? I'm so much better than others. So we have to kind of get rid of that view of the I existing in this concrete, independent, self-existent way that I was referring to in terms of looking at emptiness. Eventually, that is the final antidote to get rid of our pride. But nonetheless, we can do a lot of things to kind of reduce our pride on a more temporal basis. Another one that Venerable Thupten Chodron mentions is that we can also reflect on everything we know, every talent or ability that we have. We didn't develop these ourselves. They come from the kindness of others, right? We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the kindness of others. If we have that awareness of interdependence and how we depend upon others, then there's no room for pride, because we're not some self-sufficient, isolated thing. We're dependent upon others for everything we have. The next one is the elephant of ignorance. Let's read this. Not tamed by the sharp hooks of mindfulness and vigilance, dulled by the maddening liquor of sensual pleasures, it enters wrong paths and shows its harmful tusks. The elephant of ignorance, please protect us from this danger. So this isn't necessarily referring to the subtler ignorance, but the way in which we are plagued by a variety of forms of ignorance. Most beings in this world aren't even aware of the reality of karma, of cause and effect, that we are the creators of our own experiences. Nonetheless, we haven't tamed our minds by these sort of sharp hooks of mindfulness and vigilance. And, they use this analogy of an elephant. It's kind of an unfortunate one, but they use what's called like a goad and a rope to represent these two. The goad being this mind of introspection that's kind of making sure, checking in to see where the mind is at, and the rope being the mindfulness that holds things in place. Here it's called mindfulness and vigilance. But if you're taming an elephant, I guess you use this. It can be quite painful for the elephant to be, have this goad go into them. But we haven't done this process of taming our own minds. So the ignorance is running rampant like an elephant. They say elephants trample villages in India all the time, right? They'll just go on a rampage because they're, have this maddening mind. It's maddened by the liquor of sensual pleasures in this case. This is the big thing that we get caught up in, that we have this ignorance that thinks that we're here to just partake of the vast garden of things that are in this world, and that partaking of that pleasure is somehow satisfactory. Well, we saw from looking at the Four Noble Truths that really it's not how the world actually is. It's dukkha. It's unsatisfactory. Because even all those sensual pleasures we've had, if you piled them all up in this room, they'd be countless. But have they ultimately satisfied you? Are you there yet? We just keep needing them. Venerable Robina says we're like junkies born into a world of junk. We just keep wanting more and more and more and more. And this is how we are dulled. This is what keeps furthering our ignorance, is because we don't even pay attention to knowing the world in a much more accurate way. Instead, we just get caught up in this pattern of, being seduced by the sensual pleasures. It causes us to enter wrong paths, and it shows its harmful tusks. It causes us to be, harmed in the process. We are harming ourselves through our own ignorance, through not knowing things in a correct way. So, invoking Aryatara to help us, to be relieved of that. Of course, ignorance is mostly, alleviated through the force of our wisdom, developing more knowledge, more ability to know everything as much as we can. But of course, these factors of mindfulness and vigilance also help us to be aware of what's going on, so that we don't fall prey to these ignorant patterns in our life, so that we don't keep getting seduced by all of the pleasures that are around us. To think that, again, there's a greater power that we need to invoke within ourselves that will help us to not continue to perpetuate the patterns that have gotten us into this in the first place. So this level of ignorance, again, isn't necessarily the subtler one, but the ignorance that gets kind of seduced by everything around us and misses the point, loses the plot, as Venerable Rabina would say. It's just not in touch with reality. So let's see, I've got about 10 minutes maybe. Let's go through a few more of these. I think the fire of anger is a good one to talk to. Again, here we've moved away from any kind of animals, and we're talking about, an object, fire. This has always been used as an analogy for anger, because anger is capable of creating great devastation, even from just a tiny amount of anger, just like a tiny fire spark in California can cause huge fires, right? Wildfires. Let's read this. Driven by the wind of inappropriate attention, billowing forth swirling smoke clouds of misconduct, it has the power to burn down forests of goodness. The fire of anger, please protect us from this danger. Anger is said to be one of the worst of the delusions, because we can see in the world how much harm can be caused when we have a mind of anger. When we're upset at things being done that are in opposition to our own happiness, when we have to experience that. And so we have this wind of inappropriate attention. The mind's thinking wrongly about things. It's thinking that person is the problem, or that group, or that country, or whatever the case might be, whatever level this anger's at, that's the problem, and I need to get rid of them. Not thinking the problem's in our mind, thinking the problem is out there. And we exaggerate their role in that. We're not saying they don't play any role, but they're only a factor in it. They're not the main cause. The main cause is the anger in our own minds. We haven't developed its antidote of patience. It billows forth these swirling smoke clouds of misconduct. It just causes us to do things that we regret later. Look at how many times we've had anger in our minds and we've regretted what we said or did. We have to apologize. We have to go, I'm so sorry for what I said to you, because this is what anger causes us to do. We lose all of our ability to control ourselves. It has the power to burn down forests of goodness. This is said to be one of the worst things about anger, is that it can consume all of this positive potential that we've created. And look at the relationships that you've had that have ended on some angry note, right? And I'm sure every one of us has had at least one of those, where you got upset with somebody. Or even when you've had a relationship where you got angry at somebody, but then when you tried to repair the relationship, it was never quite as good as what it was before. So it can either kind of totally destroy it, or it kind of in some way impairs it. It keeps it from being in the most powerful form. We want our positive potential, everything we're doing that is good, to continue to grow and develop in the most powerful way. But anger completely destroys all of that. It consumes all of that powerful energy, or that positive energy. So we really want to be protected from the fire of anger, not have those, forest fires in our own minds. And of course, the main antidote is patience. But of course, patience just sounds like, when we were young, we were told that by your parents, right? Well, just be patient. But they never told you how to be patient. They just said, be patient. So you'd go, okay, how do I do that? There are many techniques for developing patience in Buddhism. And it all involves reframing the situation. So if there is somebody harming us, one example is that we see that why they're harming us is due to their own crazy mind, due to their own elephants and fires and everything else that's going on in their mind, right? They wouldn't be harming us if they were a being free of all of that. So why are we blaming them when really we should be blaming their delusions? And moreover, we should be having compassion for them. Why? Because they're being tormented by all that right now. They're suffering in the moment, and they're going to create the causes for their own suffering by doing things, harming us or harming others on the basis of that. we have to understand that others are kind of a mirror of what we're going through. If we're going through all this and we can see our own crazy mind wanting to get angry, well, if they're the starter of that by being angry at us, well, they're the same as us. There's no difference. And moreover, the only difference might be that we've learned something, that this is a problematic mind that we want to overcome, and maybe we have some ability to do that. They don't have any tools. Most beings in the world have no tools to overcome that. Yeah, their parents told them to be patient, but nobody told them how. So, there are many other tools. If you are interested in that whole area of working with anger, if that's kind of your hot button that you gets pressed frequently, again, Venerable Thupten Chodron, I'm not like trying to create interest in her, but she's written a wonderful book called Working with Anger, where she goes through methodologies and trying to overcome it. Some of them that don't even have any basis in kind of Buddhist dogma per se, they're just common sense if we really look at it. Another one is to see the disadvantages of anger for yourself. Do you feel good after you've been angry at somebody? Does anyone in the room feel good after you had one of these encounters with somebody where you've gotten red in the face and screamed at them or whatever? I mean, you don't feel good. So if you know you're not going to feel good after you do that, well then maybe don't do that. It sounds simplistic, but nonetheless, sometimes that keeps us from doing that. Look at so many of us perhaps have conditions or have some desire to avoid certain foods because we see they're not healthy for us, or they're going to cause some sort of symptoms in us. So we have the wisdom sometimes to say, okay, I'm not going to go there because I see the disadvantages, because I know if I eat that food or do this, it's going to have suffering results. It's the same with anger. If you can look at it that way and say, wow, I know where this is going to lead. I've been down that pathway before. I'm not going to go there. That can be powerful enough sometimes. Not all the time, but nonetheless, there are many techniques to work with anger. Let's go just read the verses for the rest of these, because I don't think we'll have time to go into them. The snake of jealousy. Lurking in its dark pit of ignorance, unable to bear the wealth and excellence of others, it swiftly injects them with its cruel poison. A snake of jealousy. Please protect us from this danger. And of course, the antidotes on a temporal basis for jealousy are to rejoice in others' good fortune. Of course, if you understand the law of karma, the reason why people have a lot of money or, beautiful house or whatever in their lives is because they've created that karma through their own acts of generosity and kindness. So we can rejoice that they created that. Now, what they're doing with that may be not the best thing. Then we can have some compassion for them. But to get rid of your jealousy, have great joy at what people have. The thieves of wrong views. Roaming the fearful wilds of inferior practice and the barren wastes of absolutism and nihilism, they sack the towns and hermitages of benefit and bliss. The thieves of wrong views, please protect us from this danger. So we went into these views in the weekend course at Vajrapani. We can fall into these kinds of extremes. In particular, this is the worst wrong view, is that we hear teachings on emptiness and we fall into this, nothing exists, this nihilistic bent. And then we can have a more absolutist view, that it's kind of where we are now, thinking everything exists in a very real, concrete way. If we develop kind of these wrong views, they become thieves. They get rid of the benefit that we can have by actually practicing more wisdom, by actually being more on track with how things exist. So again, this is just, you can read more about that if you wish in her book, but it's a very important thing to be attentive to, that we don't generate wrong or incorrect views of emptiness and so on. The chain of miserliness. Binding embodied beings in the unbearable prison of cyclic existence with no freedom, it locks them in craving's tight embrace. The chain of miserliness, please protect us from this danger. So this is a form of attachment. We're going to see attachment in the next one. But this one is miserliness, where we have such an attachment to things that we don't want to let them go. We don't want to share our wealth and want to share our toys. We want to be in our own little corner with them all to ourselves. This is a manifestation of this, mind that is totally antithetical to how to be in the world and connected to others and looking at others in terms of wanting to enact their welfare. It keeps us in this tight embrace that doesn't allow us to really be able to benefit others or ourselves through practicing generosity. And that's the antidote to this. You don't really overcome your miserliness unless you start giving, start practicing the mind of giving, and start with small things that you're comfortable giving. But eventually, we should be willing over time to give away even our dear bodies to others should they have a need for it. Not that that arises daily. But anyway, the wrong views, by the way, the antidote, of course, to that is by generating the correct view, studying emptiness deeply so you have the right view. The flood of attachment, sweeping us in the torrent of cyclic existence, so hard to cross, where, conditioned by the propelling winds of karma, we are tossed in the waves of birth, aging, sickness, and dead. The flood of attachment, please protect us from this danger. So they say that one of the most central forces that is driving us, the ignorance is at the root of it, but one of the forces that keeps us going from life to life is this attachment, this clinging, this craving, this desire to kind of have the things of psychic existence that are so unsatisfactory again. And we get propelled through the force of our own actions to just continue to go from life to life. But all of that's being driven by attachment. Desire is one of the most manifest ways that we continue to create our own suffering. Because we even have a craving to be embodied in this world. At the end of life, this arises very strongly. It's a force that causes us to take another rebirth on the basis of the actions we've done, the karma we've created. How do you overcome attachment? One of the main antidotes is to see things as impermanent, as fleeting, as changing, that everything changes. We shouldn't be clinging to things because there's nothing we really can hold on to. There's nothing that ultimately satisfies, and we need to be able to see that things change over time. Eventually we have to let go of everything that we find dear. And then also another way to overcome attachment is to see the undesirable aspects of these objects of attachment, that they're not all that we think they are. We exaggerate the pleasantness of them and think that it's so much greater. We have to have a much more realistic view. Now the carnivorous demon of doubt, roaming in the space of darkest confusion, tormenting those who strive for ultimate aims, it is viciously lethal to liberation. The carnivorous demon of doubt, please protect us from this danger. So carnivorous demons aren't something we run into every day either, but doubt, it's not to say that all doubt is a problem. You should have some doubts as you embark on these teachings, to always look at them through some critical eye that says, are these teachings holding water? Does emptiness really exist? Is, karma really a functioning thing in our world? All these, it's good to have some kind of skepticism when we approach the teachings. Doubt here is a demon because it's a too kind of pointed mind, and it can't make up its mind which way to go. It's like, does karma exist or doesn't it exist? Well, if you're in that space of only holding on to that doubt, you never move forward one way or another. And so doubt is an obstacle because of that. And of course, it keeps us confused. It torments us and keeps us from moving forward towards our ultimate aims, towards liberation. So the antidote to doubt, of course, is to continue our study more deeply so that we can, and our investigation through meditation, so we can come to know as best as we can what the Buddha taught and be rid of those doubts that become obstacles. Again, it doesn't mean everything that we learn in Buddhism can be absolutely analyzed and known in a factual way, but we have to have some kind of conviction that most of what the Buddha taught can be investigated that way, and therefore we have investigated it so we can take what the Buddha says as truth, because he's a reliable guide, because he's taught us truth in a variety of ways that we've known truth for ourselves. So this is how we overcome doubt. All right. Any questions before we conclude, before we recite this little dedication that comes often with the Tara practices? No questions? Everyone wants to get home. I know it's been a long day. It's a couple minutes after 9, so I'm not doing too bad. But let's recite this together and kind of, this is, again, what's often recited at the end of some of these praises in some sadhanas. It's a verse that was in the text that I was working from. Through these praises and requests to you, quell conditions unfavorable for Dharma practice, and let us have long life, positive potential, glory, plenty, and other conducive conditions as we wish. So if one recites this kind of praise at the praises and then at the end makes this request, it's said to be very powerful for creating those kinds of causes or results. Whoops. God, what did I do there? Okay. Click on that. I just want to go through this brief little advice from Venerable Thupten Chodron at the end. Again, to make sure that we unite our requests with the wisdom of emptiness of the three spheres as best as you can, meaning that there's no inherently existent or independently existent me that is making these requests. There's no independently existing requests being made. There's no independently existing Tara that is being requested. And while requesting Tara, invoke our internal wisdom and compassion. The greater our wisdom of ultimate reality, the more Tara can inspire us to deepen our realizations. So while I've only briefly touched on emptiness, it's important to pursue continual study of emptiness to make it stronger and stronger in your mind so that you can attain the deep realizations that Tara helps us to accomplish. All right, so then let's do a few more thoughts of dedication to conclude. So we already recited that wonderful verse, for everything to be conducive for our own practice. But let's think about all beings now and think that through the force of what we've done here tonight, by benefiting ourselves through turning our minds towards these teachings, we will be able to benefit others. That nothing is wasted from what we've done here tonight and will absolutely bring forth the result of the enlightenment of all beings, just as Arya Tara wishes. Then also dedicate for the good health and long lives of all of our precious guides, especially His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, all the other guides that we and others have a connection to, all the guides in whatever spiritual tradition who are helping sentient beings to be free from some level of suffering, to have greater happiness in their lives through the spiritual paths that they teach. May we and others always have perfect guides in our lives. May all these guides have good health and long lives. And then finally, if you're holding someone in your heart right now, any number of beings who are experiencing obstacles or who have illness, who are dying or who have died recently, send this positive energy out to them. Everything that you've created that is meritorious through being here tonight, share it with them so that it can become the cause for them to be free from all of what they're experiencing, all their suffering, and for them to also have the causes that will lead to true happiness and peace. And may all beings find peace and happiness through our efforts here tonight. Okay. Thank you so much. This was great.